Hi, today we've got Brendon Green from Pickles. Pickles are Australia's largest used car remarketing organisation, and Brendon has some fantastic insights into the state of the used car market and the future trends. Let's get into it.
With 30 years experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies and original equipment manufacturers. Please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
Brendon, thanks very much for joining us on the show. We interviewed you 3.5 years ago, and since then a lot has happened in the market. So maybe to kick things off, can you tell us about what's happened since we last interviewed 3 years ago up until the beginning of this year? How have you seen the market and what sort of changes have happened in the market?
Yeah, sure. Good question, John. Good to see you guys again. I think in over 3.5 years, I lost a little bit more hair by the look of it, but it has been a pretty interesting time. Obviously, the used car market, we keep our finger on the pulse as best we possibly can, and we watched it soar. Just kept climbing basically right through to around April 22, with a few different times where it would sort of plateau and then lockdown would occur again, and supply would be really challenging for new car supply. So the used car prices had jumped to the next level that we never thought they would sort of get to. So worked really closely with our big government and our fleet vendors and the financiers and everybody. It just kept watching these prices climb, but they obviously had to climax somewhere, and they did about 50% higher than what they were pre-COVID. That was really the maximum they sort of got to. And then since that period of time, the market started to dampen a little bit. It started to come back, and a few different drivers to that. I think obviously the economic climate that we've sort of seen, and inflation, interest rates and the like over the last 18 months has meant not as much demand for used cars. Also some more supply coming into the market. This is another thing. So, obviously the prices grew because of a shortfall of used vehicles. And then some new cars coming in, obviously to plug some of the gaps over the previous couple of years meant that, more vehicle availability. And so the prices have sort of come back a little bit now, and they're sort of hovering around 35% higher than what they were pre-COVID. So still very much a lot higher than what they were pre-COVID, but just not the really lofty heights as we saw back in April 22 or Easter 22 is when things started to change.
So you're saying, Brent, so the prices are coming back, but they're not back to what pre-COVID was. And we're starting to hear that there's enough supply of new cars now it's sort of just starting. I suppose it's still early days to tell for that to wash through. But what's changed since the start of this year? I'm just thinking, particularly 2023, we're almost at the back end of it. 2020, we had the big spike. We had that, you mentioned that March, April 2022 was the 50% above what pre-COVID was. What's happening in 2023, and what are you starting to see now?
So we are seeing some more supply come through. It's, when we look at, say, what VFAX releases, still about 55% of new cars going to consumers, but 45% going to business, rental, government, and that's a big segment for what we sell. But we're also seeing it, most of our customers are still saying they've got the biggest pipelines that they've ever had in terms of new car replacement, but they're certainly getting a lot more phone calls from the dealers and the like with cars that aren't being placed with consumers. And the dealers are certainly saying that there's been more cancellations from consumers of late, just because, when they go and redo their financials, because of interest rates and other bits and pieces, they can't really put those customers into those cars. So the customer steps away from that original order, and therefore the dealer's got a vehicle on hand and they want to be able to sell that. So they're reaching out to their more corporate type customers, and those cars are then making their way through to us. I think we are seeing more consistency from a production level. We monitor through Datum Insights, our data analytics business. We monitor production levels globally as well. So, the likes of China, Japan and Korea don't really have much of a supply issue, and they're mostly back to pre-COVID levels or greater in the case of China. And there's a big chunk of Australian new car deliveries come out of those three regions in particular. So, with healthy supply from those manufacturers and out of those areas, they're certainly making their way through, becoming available, not being picked up by consumers, and therefore making their way through to big state governments, all the FMOs, councils, not-for-profits, those kind of segments that are our strong suit in terms of what we sell day to day.
So with a question around the vehicles, because this is there's been a lot of talk around leases got extended during COVID and the month and the years after, subsequent years afterwards, because we're looking at a 1.2 million car market for 2023, which is amazing when you think that you would have thought we would have caught up by now with the drop that 2020 gave us, where it dropped down to about 980,000, but we've been over that 1 million, 1.1 pretty much since then. So we only really dropped out 50,000 cars in 2020, but you would have thought we will and truly made up. The car parks got bigger, so there's a million more cars on the road. I'm keen to get your observation and the feedback from, say, the fleet customers so they've extended their leases, would it be fair to say, in 2020 and 21 because they couldn't get replacement stock. Does that mean the cars that you're getting back are older than what they normally would be, and they've got higher Ks than what they would normally be, and the condition's not as good as what they'd normally be?
That's true. And I think that's also led to some of the reduction in used car pricing, because we are seeing more and more of those vehicles that were extended or they're in inertia, as the fleet companies refer to. And that you're right, the condition has deteriorated. We're seeing greater unfair wear and tear that, we diagnose that for most of our government, our fleet customers. So we're seeing more and more of that come through. So, I think the average age of a fleet car these days is north of 5 years, where it used to be around 42 months from memory. So that's a pretty good indication of the sort of the overall new sort of vehicles that are coming through to us or the vehicles that are coming through to us on a regular basis. I guess that's going to be like that for probably another year or so, till it sort of washes out and all of those really large backlogs of orders get washed through, because again, the fleet companies have got really large pipelines of vehicles to be replaced. And so, I still think there's quite a large, probably still 250,000 vehicles on back order, as we understand. And I know some of the big retailers have sort of mentioned that in the press as well. And that's sort of what we think, if we look at that sort of dip between 2020, 21 and 22, it's a fairly large gap there. And so I think there's still some time for that to play out over the rest of 23, 24, maybe into 25, while, that all catches up. So yeah, I think there's a lot of used cars that there'll be more used cars sold over the next 12 to 18 months in particular, as they work through some of that backlog.
So would it be fair to say also that with those 250,000 cars that are yet to be replaced, during the last 3 years, would it be fair to say that the OEMs and the dealers favoured private retail buyers over and above the fleet operators like the leasing companies and the government, etc.? So they've extended, which is why you've got that back order of 250,000. And because when we still had 1.1 million cars being sold over the last couple of years, so that means more have gone to retail than fleet. So fleets sort of there's still some momentum in the new car market from a fleet perspective, which also means used cars. There's the starvation of good low kilometre used cars. Like you can't get a good low K ex-renter because they've all got high Ks on them. Yeah,
I agreed. There is a shortfall of that low kilometre. Even the OEM sales that we would conduct, a lot of the vehicles that they would typically turn over on a 6-month basis for their staff all basically got extended out for at least 12 months so that they could prioritise stock getting through to the consumers, because they just had such shortfalls all over the place. So none of the OEM levels are back to what they were pre-COVID yet, and they may never return potentially as well, which is interesting. But there is certainly if we see younger stock come through, it's climbed all over by the trade and the consumers that buy from us directly, because it's a little bit different as opposed to things that are now, there's a lot more assets that are 4 to 6 years old than that used to be 3 to 5, and everything's kind of, which was probably going to happen, with the extension of warranty. Some of this may be just fleet changes and policy changes too, because warranties all of a sudden went from 3 years, 60 to 5 years, 100 or 7 years unlimited, right? So there was always going to be the aging of some of those vehicles as well. So maybe it's a little bit disguised as part of that as well. But there's no government that runs a 2-year 40 policy anymore.
I was going to ask that because they were always the best cars.
100%.
2-year 40.
I don't think there's any. We've got some that are out to 5 years for passenger and 7 years for commercial, which is really, which is at one end of the spectrum. And then there's others that are still running at sort of 3 and 4 year, depending on, just depends on the policy and the volumes and the budget, the state budgets and the like. So, yeah, it really does vary. But anything that's, under 3 years is really well sought after at this point.
And are they tool of trade cars or are they benefit cars like novated lease or benefit cars? Which ones are you seeing there's more of, or is one getting bigger than another?
Yeah, less so of the novated. The majority of novateds still get turned over. A lot of mums and dads will still pay them out at end of lease and then carry them on for another couple or 18 months and then sell them on car sales. So there's not a lot of salary packaged assets that are coming through. There's some more tool of trade, not just the pool cars, but a car that's given to that individual to perform their role. Quite a lot of hybrids still coming through. There's a lot of light commercials that are coming through. Probably more light commercials now than we've seen for a long time. It's more just that tool of trade car that we're seeing on a regular basis come through at this point.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that you're talking about that extension of that period. Going to an older vehicle. It'll be interesting to see if once free supply comes back, as you say, whether they'll hold the vehicle longer because of the longer warranties and that. It'll be interesting to see the cost structures on those vehicles and whether that tipping point to when to replace the vehicle.
Yeah, we'd hear that from some of the FMOs actually because cars were in inertia or they were being rolled on and roll on, they were getting some fairly significant maintenance challenges with their customers and that they may or may not be out of warranty as well. So, which is not typical of an FMO car because typically it's all within warranty and there was some fairly large maintenance costs. So that was causing issues. So they were really desperate to get their customers in to the new one, not, just for the repeat business, but to help minimise the challenges they're having with just keep the fleet, running as well. So there's a whole different element that sort of came into, managing those fleet older assets that isn't typical of an FMO having to do, yes, they're doing maintenance all the time, but not things that are particularly out of warranty by 50,000 kilometres and those kind of things, right? Or several years. So, new things that the FMOs had to learn to grapple with.
And I suppose also they had challenges if the vehicle broke down and was off-road for a few days. Clients came back to the FMO saying, well, I need a replacement vehicle, something's happening on it. So there's quite a lot of more complex issues.
Correct. And just not a lot of those replacement vehicles around it either, right? So that, typically a lot of fleet companies that have excess vehicles just sitting around that we would manage for them. And then they'd say, release this to XYZ corporation because they need that for an interim period, but there wasn't as much of that sitting around just because anything excess was being repurposed for a customer that might had to fill a gap in their fleet. So different dynamics that we saw, particularly for a lot of the FMOs and some of the governments in that case.
Now, Brendon, last time we spoke, your son was getting an LCV or looking for one, and we were talking about the challenges around getting LCVs. And I've got to say to anyone listening, best place to get an LCV is your auctions because I think that's where you get the best value LCVs. What's happened in the LCV market, and what are you seeing? Because you mentioned before there's a few more coming on. Is it from a supply and also from a pricing perspective and a condition?
So there were some real challenges with a lot of those. There's not too many bad LCVs out there these days in terms of utes. It's a very competitive space. A lot of them just about, I think they're all 5-star rated, so they can all work mine sites if they really need to and the like. So really competitive space. There was some particular production challenges that they had, and I think that's all not as much of an issue now, but every one of our big fleet customers has a lot of exposure to the LCV market. I think we're probably overrepresented from an LCV mix of what we would see just due to the makeup of customers that we have and our customers the fleet companies have. So compared to what might be sold from at a BFAX level, so we've got a lot coming through, but so the prices on those have actually come down faster than the passenger cars and the SUVs in particular, in particular. So, and I think that's just due to you're right, Mark. the way in which there's more kilometres on them. They're often workhorses, right? So the typical 5-year 120k Hilux Ranger, etc., is probably now more like closer to 6.5, 7, closer to 200,000 kilometres. And so there's a fair amount of that volume that's come through, which has often got a bit more unfair wear and tear, needs a bit more love. So that the trade, when they're looking at them, they're being a bit more selective, I suppose, before they're buying them. And because they do need a bit of work, and even just some of that, in a lot of states we're hearing just getting panel repair done and the like, everyone's having trouble recruiting staff left, right, and centre in whatever industry, but and parts supply is still a challenge in some of those areas as well. So I think that's part of it too. Is the trade, when they're looking at them, a bit more selective around what they want to pay for those assets. So and there's just a bit more of volume there. So therefore, it's probably magnified the reduction in the LCV area. So it'll probably take it. It's certainly depreciating faster. We think that area will probably get back to the normal pricing, and I'll talk about normal pricing in a second if you like. In the future, faster than say SUV and passenger. We've sort of put a bit of a stake in the ground. We feel like the used car market's going to normalise itself in about the end of 2024. We feel like that's going to be about 10 to 15% higher than COVID, though. We could see even pre-COVID from 2016, 17 onwards, used car prices were growing. There was a trend of them heading north with RRP increases, more tech, more innovation and the like coming into cars. And we could just see, and with 2017 being the highest used vehicles on record, albeit 2023 is probably going to beat it. The used car park was at that point shrinking because there wasn't as many new cars coming in 18, 19, 20. And therefore, that was another compounding factor that with that used car market shrinking, it was putting pressure on used car prices heading north. So we feel like prices will level out at about the end of 24 and about 10 to 15% higher than what they were pre-COVID.
Brendon, talking about EVs, there's been a lot of discussion around EVs, and we're starting to see them come into the market. I think when Mark and I last looked, there were about 73,000 vehicles on the road, EVs. Are you starting to see any sort of volume coming through your auctions now? And what are the sort of prices looking at? How are they holding their value?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I talked about the average used car price in April last year was 50% higher than pre-COVID. It was 70% higher for an EV in April last year. So they climbed even higher, but there was a lot more volatility of used EV prices all the way through. They have also decelerated a little faster than we saw with ICE vehicles. So part of that is, there is more supply. For a long, long time, you're waiting 12 or 18 months for a Tesla, for instance, and then there was more supply of Tesla, and you get Polestar, and then all of a sudden, one of the other factors is there's some cheaper Chinese type entrants that have made their way into the market in the form of MG and BYD and other choice, Ioniq and lots of other vehicles that have come into vogue. So I think that's put a lot of pressure on that. And also, one of the large OEMs who might remain nameless can send a tweet out and reprice their RRPs pretty rapidly these days, which is not typical behaviour of an OEM who has a very stagnant pricing methodology. So all of those factors in together, along with inflation factors and interest rate factors, I think have put a lot more pressure on that EV market. So it's just decelerated faster than, let's say, the ICE market might have. Yeah, we're seeing that a lot. We're not seeing a huge amount of volume though, John. So we're seeing, we might have 10 EVs that we'll see put up each week. A lot of interest. So we've got a greater penetration selling direct to consumer on a used EV than we do even hybrid and an ICE. So it's already good to see some strong uptake from consumers following the EVs coming through. So we've seen a really good role for ourselves with the helping EV adoption over in the coming years. A lot of the governments and the fleets are into that, and that's part of their strategy with with their EV strategy was to obviously get into these vehicles, where some of the depreciation help, and then resell those when they're coming off. So we're sort of working really closely with the governments to make sure that, and the fleets, to make sure we've got really easy channels for our customers to buy those from us. Because let's face it, there's probably a whole bunch of consumers out there that are doing it tough now. They own an ICE car. They want to get into EV. They don't have the 70 grand or the 60 grand to get into it, but they may have 30, may have 25. So I think it's the only way to really, increase adoption is through used EVs in the near future. So we see a really critical role for ourselves in that over the coming years. We know that they're coming. When we talk to the governments and the fleets, they're sort of saying, look, it's not right now, but within 18 months there will be this and that. So we will probably end up having dedicated EV sales, the national type sales that we'll put together, and just focus in a live auction that everybody can log in and bid. And the used EV buyers are so well educated. They probably know more about those cars than we do, to be brutally honest, because they're so well read. There's so much information on the net. If you've had 3 or 4 or 5 Corollas in a row and you want to go and buy yourself a used Ioniq, you're going to do a whole lot of work. You're probably going to have test driven it, all of that sort of stuff, and know it intimately, or a Model 3 or a Polestar, whatever it is, that they're so well researched on these cars, and they're buying with a lot of confidence, knowing what they're buying. And, there's even more confidence, I think, when it comes to buying. There's always been a little bit of a stigma about buying direct from auction. I don't know what I'm buying, but there's less servicing issues on those types of vehicles in the future, right? More about the battery, which we're working on some tech, battery health tech and the likes as well. But, I think you're going to see a gravitation to used EVs with a lot more confidence in those vehicles, because there isn't the servicing issues and the like that you see with typical ICE cars. So, yeah, we've got a really bright future. We're doing a lot of work ourselves, me personally as well, in that EV space to make sure we're across it, creating the right pathways, charge infrastructure. There's a whole range of things we've got to do to be ready for it. But lots and lots of really healthy and positive conversations with with our vendors around, their big EV pipelines that'll mature in the not too distant future.
John and I have always said, Brendon, the secret to EV adoption is actually to put low kilometre used EVs into the general market, because the innovators and early adopters are buying the new ones. But you're right, it's the thinking person who is mindful of their spend. They're the ones, that market is more than triple the size of the early adopters. These are the people that we need to get the cars to, and it's great that you're really proactive in that area. And I love the idea of that dedicated EV auction, because you're really going to get a lot of B2C or G2C activity happening with that, and it's great because they can then buy with confidence. A question I was going to ask you about the battery health checks. What's the tech coming with that? Because there's a bit of chatter about that. There's a bit of uncertainty. Batteries have always been a bit of a boogeyman when it comes to the EVs. But what can you tell us?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's not a lot of hardware suppliers out there with any kind of diagnostics. There's some limited providers out there. We've had some good conversations. None of it's within Australia; it's all overseas, and we've got a few devices we're testing right now to help us diagnose. And ultimately, we want to be able to create an awareness for the customer that's buying. So if they can see it, they can see there's a battery health score of X%, and it's got a range. If the car came out of the factory with 400 range, it's now 3 years, 60,000 Ks, it's got 350 range. And the battery health score of 85%. That's probably tick. That's all I need to know. I'm happy to go, because if I'm buying it at 4 years of age, I've still got 4 to 6 years OEM battery warranty on that anyway. So there's a lot of confidence that'll come with the OEM battery warranty. But, us being able to say, here's an independent battery health score, that's what we're trying to work towards. There's also, a need from the fleet managers. They will need to understand how, potentially how those batteries have been charged, and has there been a contribution if the battery has degraded rapidly and it's because of incorrect charging, and then how do we help them price what that looks like? So there's a whole bunch of stuff to learn in that environment, but we're doing a lot, and it's just good to have good people in my team that are invested in understanding that, and that just working with good tech providers this is very much emerging, and giving them constant feedback about, hey, we're doing this test and we can, it's working on these cars, but not as well on these cars, and a whole bunch of different things we're working through with them. So it's good, nice to be doing things. Probably there wouldn't be too many people doing these things in Australia right now, so it's nice to be looking at that. And every customer we talk to about it is like, oh, that's fantastic. We need to know about that. Just make sure you're keeping us in the loop, and because it may just come down to education for their staff or their client as to what they've done in the past and how they may have contributed or may not have contributed to the that battery. And for us, it's probably more about how do we provide confidence to that consumer or the trade buyer as to what the state of health is and the range on that car. So it's really cool. Yeah, it's been really interesting. A really interesting time of learning for us. Looking at this kind of tech.
No, what was quite interesting, we're talking to someone out of Finland, and they've been, since 2012, 90% of all vehicles sold were EV. So they're starting to get a lot of volume coming through now, 10, 12-year-old. And he said what was quite fascinating is the prices have decreased to about €5,000, and they just bottom out at that €5,000 level. Even though the mileage available on the battery is like 80 Ks, and they said people are buying them, they've got solar panels on their roof, and they use it as a second car just to take their kids to school or buy groceries and that. So he said that's quite fascinating that it just decreased and then it's flattened out at this €5,000 level. He said he doesn't know why 5,000, but that's what it seems to have bottomed out at.
Yeah, there's I think in Hungary there's a used EV vehicle incentive scheme, right? So I think it's the only country globally that does it, right? So as a result, the trade buyers out of Hungary are buying from all over Europe, and they're really, they can punt harder on any EV than anyone else because they've got this incentive and they've got a strong consumer demand for used EVs in that particular country. So, I think there could be some things that Australia could look at in that space, to again, help with that used EV adoption. But yeah, there's so much information out there on the net about EVs, and it's all across LinkedIn and the like. Trying to decipher what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's not is pretty tricky.
You're not saying there's misinformation on LinkedIn?
No, never. But it's we're really enjoying getting our teeth into it. That's for sure.
No, I've got to also do a shout out for your Datium Insights. Anyone who really wants to get an understanding of the big picture should definitely follow and subscribe to your information there. That global production tracking that you guys do is exceptional. That is the real number, and so many people in the industry are not aware of how that affects the market here. It is so critical. So critical.
Yeah, they do a good job. We certainly, we brought in people that actually came out of the fleet management residual value world to into our business because we basically started a whole bunch of data, a lot of sale data points right back to 2000. It was all the data that they get to play with. So there's some incredible trends and projections and modelling and all that stuff they get to do these days. And again, we've got a partnership with Moody's, which is quite unique as well. There's a lot of the big FMOs will utilise it. When they're they've got to do market updates and test where their risk sits compared to what we say they are using it for. So yeah, there's some really unique relationships been able to form off the back of that. The Datium guys, and certainly us old Pickles guys weren't smart enough to put that together, so we had to bring some experts in. That's what they are, pure mathematicians that put a lot of science behind it. But it's given us just something different to talk about with customers and a different way to support them than traditionally just dropping the hammer on their cars. So it's good.
Another question for me is around auctions. You've gone to online auctions and you're still running the face-to-face auctions. Where do you see that space and where do you see it going in the long run?
Well, for us, John, we actually haven't gone back to in-room auctions, so we're just purely digital these days. So, there's pretty detailed condition reports online that everybody gets to look at, the trade and mums and dads, and hasn't really affected the amount of consumers that are buying from us nor the trade. Our vendors have supported us with that, which has been good. And so it's really been a big change for some of our buyers. But I suspect that's just that'll keep playing out, John, is our take on it. And it's if it was affecting prices, which it clearly isn't, in that they're still well north of what they were pre-COVID, then we probably would have had to change things, but that's not been the case at all. So for us, things like keep on developing, and with that whole online piece, we've got high res photographs, but what can we do better around that? Better descriptions on the assets, new inspection types. There's a whole range of things. We're playing with some AI tools in the background for diagnosis of unfair wear and tear off. We take millions of photographs every year of all the unfair wear and tear. We can run through an AI machine and help price, automatically rather than necessarily off matrices. And it's often a very much one person's opinion is this of that particular damage, and another one's this, and the AFLA guideline, you have to work with that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're working on in that space, which is good for us. There's just so much probably focus on that EV, maybe too much focus on the EV space, John, but it's just heading that way, and everyone's, I think everyone's fleet is going that way. When I get to speak at a few fleet events, and when I talk to some of I'll ask the fleet managers in the room, not the FMOs, the actual fleet managers at a council, not-for-profit level and the like, and I'll ask who's actually got EVs in their fleet or who's got them on order, and there's a bunch of hands in the air, and they've all got a few. But when I say who's actually sold one, most of the hands come down, and there's only a handful of people with those. So I think that's for us. We've got a good role to play in the education of EVs and making sure, and there's a heap of focus on it, right? Because, there's a lot of these those smaller companies that want to gravitate to EV. It's expensive. They want to make sure they're getting a really strong price, because if you're doing a business case around it and then you get a lousy sale price at the end of the day, it just probably waters down the whole business case, and there's probably less attraction of the whole C-suite wanting to move all in on EV and the like. So it gets a lot of focus. So for us, making sure we're getting strong pricing for customers and lots of bids on those assets is really, really a really big focus. So a lot in the EV space, John, I think is what you'll see out of us. And 50% of what we sell is government and fleet. And so we're going to see a big pipeline of XEVs in the future.
So no more face-to-face auctions for even the general public?
No.
So what about inspections? Can they still go out and look at the cars?
So our fixed price area, which is the semi-retail, they can. And they make an appointment like you would at a dealership, make an appointment online and come down and see the car. But yeah, not so much in the auctions. So
the old day before the government auction, you could go down and have a look at the car and say, do I like that or not?
Yep.
That's all done.
Yep. But it's not happening at the moment. So, and
that's incredible.
But when you think about some of that government stock, it's just about, some of it is completely rectified. There's nothing wrong with these cars. They're fully serviced. What's to inspect? It's a hybrid Camry with no unfair wear and tear on it, right? Like, or it's a Hilux with, it's got full service and no unfair wear and tear. What is to inspect? So it's I think where people would love to see it is on some of the really older stock that may be problematic. Now, with that really older stock that's problematic, probably goes in our salvage area anyway, which is a completely different buyer set that might be pulling it apart for for dismantling for parts and and the like. And we don't try our best not to sell anything with an engine light on or those sort of things. We need to sort of remove that so we don't have those issues. And particularly now, like, we're having to be very transparent with our condition reports, because buyers are buying from all over the country. So you often sell something out of Brisbane to an Adelaide dealer or something out of Adelaide to a Melbourne dealer. So if you misdescribe something, they'll come back at a million miles an hour. So we're highly transparent with what we put in our condition reports for that particular reason, because we need to be like that with the seller, so they understand what we're selling, we can value it correctly and the like. And then also with the buyer, we're just basically being Switzerland in between the two parties at the end of the day, right? So we've got to represent that car as it stands. And so there's not a lot of conjecture, but all the photographs, you can zoom right in on all the damage these days anyway. So it's just like being there. Just you can't start a 10-year-old car and see blue smoke blow out the window out the back, like that sort of stuff. But that's pretty few and far between these days. So
isn't it amazing? That is incredible. That post-COVID, we just don't show up.
No, and there's many of our competitors are just sort of gone online. There's one that's sort of gone back to in-room and the like. But when I did a sneaky visit there wasn't stacks and stacks of people at the auction either, right? So I think it's, people have adjusted. We're all buying things online. Granted, we're not buying a $25,000 used car online every week, but we're all buying so much more online, so much more confidence online. The next gen that's coming through, and it's hard for us guys that have probably, grew up with the, in that auction, visiting the auction lanes. And I know, Mark, you bought a couple of cars off us over time. You bought one online, I'm sure.
I did.
There you go. So, but it's just the way it's all happening. And the next gen probably wouldn't have been coming to kick the tires on those cars anyway, because they just, if it says it's good on TikTok, it's good enough for them anyway, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I'll disclaimer here. I think it's the best place to buy a car, whether you're a dealer or a consumer. Great place for fleets to match their vehicles to the market. So yeah, absolutely.
And to be fair, with some of the OEMs, all the OEMs are online these days as well, right? So there was a couple of OEMs that we worked for that were already online because they felt was a disadvantage to all of the dealers that were interstate. If we were hosting an auction in Sydney and they had majority of their assets majority of their dealerships are not in Sydney, they're all around the country. They actually said, let's run a closed auction anyway, an online auction anyway, because it's fairer then everybody is in the same boat. They're all reading the same condition reports. And so from a probity and a fairness perspective, it's actually, it's very even Stevens then for anybody to be buying, whether you're interstate or happen to be, 2 kilometres from the branch if you happen to live there. So it was already happening in the OEM space, and then so it's just sort of really continued on from that.
Brendon, you make such a good point about the honesty and integrity. It's so important that there's no ways you can mess with that if you want to be a successful business. So
yeah,
it makes such good sense. And it's actually better to have the full integrity and honesty online than we go back to the old days where everything was sort of patched and hidden, and hopefully customer beware, sort of attitude.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we sell some dealer trade vehicles, and it's not ever from trade-ins from dealers, and they're pretty good with what they send through to us, and we'll often say, yeah, we know you've got more than that, and they're like, yeah, but I don't want to give you these ones because we know Pickles and you're a stand-up provider, and we don't want to give you some vehicles that have got some challenges, so we'll send them elsewhere. Thanks. So, and that's we're all respect to them for doing that, because they understand that a lot of what we genuinely sell is a lot of consignment stuff that comes out of government and council and not for profit and corporate, and that's and finance repossession and the like. And that's often the space we play in. And so we tend to get better quality trades that come from dealers when we do, rather than things that might have an inherent issue. And if they do, if we find them and they tell us about it, they'll just go into the salvage area anyway and be sold that way. So it's like you said, John, you just got to be transparent these days, because you get caned online if you don't anyway, right? You get and we still get, negative reviews like everybody does. You can't get around it. We sell too many cars not to have the odd the odd review. So transparency is the best policy for us, and it was the way that the Pickles family were, from when I joined back in '97, and probably one from WAC and when they founded in 1964. So that's been a big part of what we do.
I've got two more, if I may.
Sure.
One is, what's hot? You mentioned SUVs. Are they the hottest thing right now? Is it a used SUV is where the hot market is?
What's interesting is the vehicle segment that has not depreciated very much at all is the passenger vehicle segment. It's a much smaller segment, and it often is where a more affordable price segment. So if we look at assets that are with an RRP of less than 30,000, and granted, there's not as many cars that are less than 30,000 RRP from new these days. Barely dropped in the past 18 months, where everything else has been depreciating. Same with the passenger segment, hasn't really dropped very much at all. As hasn't, what's the other one? The hybrids, hybrids have barely dropped in from a depreciation perspective as well. So those three segments, so cars with an RRP of under 30, passengers in general, and hybrids, barely reduction from April 22. Since then, everything else has been, just in a steady decline.
Wow, that's incredible.
There's a lot of the purchases these days, whether it's from trade or direct for consumers. It's they're going after price in terms of and we saw this during the GFC too, because when tough economic times, I can't go out and buy a brand new whatever. I'll go and get a good quality used one. And so anybody that's selling used cars for a period of time is those prices will be held up, intrinsically because of the demand from consumers that are buying good quality, chasing good quality used cars. So that's a positive for anybody that's got residuals or they're going to be selling down their fleet over the next few years.
And the average price of a used car, like a 3-year-old used car, is it 25 grand? You mentioned 25 is the number.
Yeah, it's around that price. It was up sort of around the 30 mark, closer to the 30 mark, I think, and now it's around that 25. Sort of hovers between, depends on the quality of stock and what we get from month to month. Sometimes varies a little bit, but it's around that 24 and a half mark, I think. Thereabouts on average.
Geez, I'm old enough to remember, and I used to look at the data from your government auctions, and it was like 16 grand was the average price for a used government car. Now it's 25 grand.
Yep, correct.
Mind you, I'm talking probably 15 years ago.
Yeah,
but it's interesting. It's slowly moving up.
It's going to continue to soften. It can't stay here forever. It's certainly going to hang. If that was, I think it'll sort of land at about that 19K mark, or it might have been at 17 and a half sort of thing. Pre-COVID, it'll probably land at that 19 to 20 mark is what we're thinking overall. And as I said, a lot of this information isn't stuff that I'm making up. It's coming out of the Datium guys, our data insights business. So it's been fantastic having the support of those guys through the last 4 or 5 years to provide us with these insights so that we can deliver them to, the likes of yourselves and customers, and just try to, provide a bit more information where we can.
And that's why we really appreciate you coming on the show again. Even though it's been 3.5 years, we might catch on a bit earlier for the next one. But Brendon, we really appreciate you've got your Datium insights, so you've got your data, but what we find most important is your personal expertise. So you've got the data, that's the foundation, but it's the interactions that you're having with all the industry players, because it's so critical that so many people who are in the auto industry aren't aware of all those other elements.
Yeah,
and we really appreciate your feedback. The whole idea of hang on, these organisations have extended their leases, so that's why there's the prices are coming down on those particular LCVs. But that doesn't mean that LCVs are always going to be down. It means that we're going to get newer LCVs coming as used cars in 3, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years' time. So the lengths may be shorter. That you won't have those extended cars anymore, because we're going to get back to a degree of normalisation. But we really appreciate your insights with that, because there's a lot of hype out there around used cars. There's a lot of people saying, I'm a hero in used cars. I'm just doing really well. And it's going to be never-endingly amazing. But, we know that the pendulum swings. Supply is over here, and next thing it's over here. So lots or none, then lots. So, but then there's all these other little factors coming into play with EVs, with the mix, with passenger cars. Once upon a time, passenger cars were bad news as used cars. It's not now. That's fascinating. And the average price is 25 grand. Well, the average new car price is 50, so that makes sense that we're seeing these are the elements that are at play. But we really thank you for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom, because it is wisdom, and it affects so many people, because everybody has a used car or has a car, which is an asset, and depreciation is the biggest enemy of the car. So really appreciate your time coming on the show again, and we'd love to have you back again in the not too distant future to give us another update.
Appreciate that. Thank you, John. Thanks, Mark, for the opportunity. It's been great. As just as you're saying that, I think the last thing to finish on is obviously there's a whole lot of talk around agency and the like. And Mark, you've seen it at an OEM level. There's a lot of money to be made in the used car, focusing on used vehicles within a dealership. That has to be magnified under a growing agency model where you can control margin in that space. And again, I think it just adds to, that used vehicle being a really popular purchase. And if you're selling used vehicles, if you're a vendor that's selling used vehicles, there's a whole lot of things that you should have some confidence in where the market's heading, that the prices shouldn't ever fall off a cliff again. I say that it could be COVID Mark 3 or whatever, but that the used vehicle prices should, from a competition perspective in the future, as the agency model plays out in all of its various forms, I think they're going to be, used vehicles are always going to be popular, and it's a great business to be in. If you're not already doing used in a dealership, I'd really seriously look at it, because it's an untapped gold mine for a lot of dealerships.
No, Brendon, thanks very much. We really enjoyed that. Some fascinating things happening in the markets. Really appreciate that.
Good to chat with you, gents. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Hopefully you got as much out of the discussion with Brendon as we did. Brendon always has some gems, and whether you're a customer or a dealer or a fleet operator, I strongly recommend you engage with Brendon and his team, because you'll get great value no matter which side of the transaction you are. But always great to do business with the team at Pickles. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks very much for watching. We'd also really appreciate you subscribing to our channel, either one of our audio channels or one of the YouTube or TikTok channels. So thanks very much.